3 months into their marriage, Rachel Chen discovered that being Carmen's niece came with responsibilities she had never anticipated. The first hint arrived on a Tuesday morning in the form of a phone call that interrupted her peaceful breakfast routine with Marcus, who had been reading aloud particularly absurd news headlines while she attempted to master the art of making perfectly fluffy pancakes. Rachel, mija, I need your help with something important. Carmen's voice carried that particular tone of urgency that Rachel had learned to approach with caution. Over the years, Carmen's emergencies had ranged from legitimate crises requiring immediate family intervention to elaborate schemes disguised as urgent situations. "What's going on?" Rachel asked, balancing the phone between her shoulder and ear while flipping a pancake that had achieved an impressive golden brown perfection. "It's about your cousin, Miguel. You remember Miguel, Isabella's younger brother? He's been acting very strangely lately, and I'm concerned he's getting himself into trouble." Rachel did remember Miguel, though her mental image remained frozen at his 18th birthday party, where he had seemed primarily interested in video games and avoiding conversations with older relatives. That had been 2 years ago, and she realized with some surprise that Miguel would now be 20, presumably navigating the complex territory of early adulthood with varying degrees of success. "What kind of trouble?" Rachel asked, earning a curious glance from Marcus, who had abandoned the newspaper in favor of listening to her side of the conversation. "He's been secretive about where he spends his time, defensive when anyone asks about his plans, and last week Isabella found expensive gifts in his room that he couldn't explain. Designer clothes, jewelry, electronics, things a college student working part-time at a bookstore couldn't possibly afford." Rachel felt a familiar sinking sensation as she recognized the pattern of Carmen's concerns escalating into family-wide investigations. "Have you talked to him directly?" "Of course I've tried, but he brushes off my questions and changes the subject. Your mother thinks I'm overreacting, but I have a feeling something serious is happening. That's why I need you to help me figure out what's going on." "Me? Carmen, I barely know Miguel as an adult. We see each other at family gatherings, but we're not close enough for him to confide in me about personal problems." "Exactly," Carmen said, as if Rachel had made her point rather than argued against it. "He won't be suspicious of your interest the way he would be if Isabella or I started asking too many questions. You can approach this casually, maybe invite him to lunch or coffee, get him talking about his life." Rachel closed her eyes, recognizing the familiar sensation of being recruited into one of Carmen's investigative operations. Her aunt had an uncanny ability to identify family problems before anyone else noticed them, but her methods of addressing those problems often involved elaborate surveillance and manipulation that made Rachel deeply uncomfortable. "Carmen, if Miguel is in some kind of trouble, shouldn't his mother handle it? Isabella is perfectly capable of talking to her own son." "Isabella is too close to the situation. She sees what she wants to see, believes what she wants to believe. Sometimes it takes an outside perspective to recognize when someone is heading down a dangerous path." The phrase struck Rachel as uncomfortably familiar, reminding her of Carmen's explanation for her months-long campaign to test Marcus's commitment. Her aunt seemed to view herself as the guardian against poor decisions and hidden problems, willing to employ whatever methods seemed necessary to protect the people she loved. "What exactly do you think Miguel is involved in?" Rachel asked, though she wasn't certain she wanted to hear the answer. "Drugs, maybe? Or gambling? Or he could be involved with the wrong crowd, people who are using him for something illegal. Those expensive gifts had to come from somewhere, and I don't believe his explanation about finding good deals online." Rachel glanced at Marcus, who was now openly eavesdropping with an expression of sympathetic amusement. He had quickly learned that Carmen's concerns often developed into elaborate family dramas that required careful navigation to avoid making situations worse. Couldn't there be innocent explanations? Maybe he has a girlfriend whose family has money, or maybe he's been saving up for months to buy nice things for himself. "Maybe," Carmen conceded, though her tone suggested she found these possibilities unlikely. "But if that's the case, then talking to you won't hurt anything. And if something more serious is happening, then we need to know sooner than later." Rachel found herself trapped between her desire to avoid involvement in family investigations and her genuine concern for Miguel's well-being. Carmen's instincts about family problems had proven accurate in the past, even when her methods of addressing those problems were questionable. If Miguel was genuinely in trouble, Rachel would want to help. If Carmen was simply being overprotective, then a casual conversation with Miguel would quickly reveal that her concerns were unfounded. "All right," Rachel said reluctantly. "I'll reach out to Miguel and see if he wants to get together. But Carmen, I'm not going to interrogate him or spy on him. If he's dealing with something difficult, he deserves to be approached with respect and honesty." "Of course, mija. I'm not asking you to spy. Just spend time with him. Let him know he has family support if he needs it, and see if he opens up about what's been going on in his life." After ending the call, Rachel found Marcus watching her with knowing sympathy. Another Carmen situation? "She's worried about Miguel, thinks he might be involved in something illegal or dangerous. She wants me to investigate." Marcus raised his eyebrows. "Investigate how?" "By taking him to lunch and seeing if he confides in me about whatever's been making him secretive lately. Carmen found expensive gifts in his room that he can't explain, and apparently his behavior has been strange." "And you agreed to this because?" Rachel considered the question while transferring their pancakes to plates. "Because if Miguel is actually in trouble, I want to help. And because refusing Carmen's requests tends to create more family drama than just going along with them."
Fair point, but what happens if Miguel isn't in trouble? What if Carmen is seeing problems that don't exist? Then I'll have had a nice lunch with my cousin, and Carmen will hopefully drop her concerns, Rachel said, though she suspected the situation wouldn't resolve quite so simply. Carmen's worries had a tendency to persist until they were either definitively proven wrong or validated by dramatic revelations. That afternoon, Rachel texted Miguel to suggest meeting for coffee later in the week. His response was friendly, but slightly cautious, agreeing to meet but asking if there was any particular reason for the invitation. Rachel assured him that she simply wanted to catch up, which was technically true, even if it wasn't the complete explanation. They arranged to meet at a coffee shop near the University of Illinois campus, where Miguel was completing his junior year studying computer science. Rachel arrived 15 minutes early, partly out of habit and partly because she wanted time to observe Miguel's demeanor and appearance before they began talking. He appeared precisely on time, looking remarkably different from the awkward teenager Rachel remembered from family gatherings. Miguel had grown several inches taller and filled out considerably, his dark hair styled with obvious care, and his clothes clearly expensive and well-fitted. He wore designer jeans, a leather jacket that looked Italian, and shoes that Rachel estimated had cost several $100s. "Rachel, hey," Miguel said, embracing him with easy familiarity. "You look great. Marriage agrees with you." "Thanks, Miguel. You look pretty good yourself. Very stylish." He grinned, seemingly pleased by the compliment. "I've been paying more attention to clothes lately. Figured it was time to upgrade from the t-shirt and sweatpants uniform." They ordered coffee and settled into a corner booth where they could talk privately. Rachel found herself studying Miguel's appearance and behavior for signs of the problems Carmen had described, but he seemed relaxed, confident, and genuinely happy to see her. "So, how's married life treating you?" Miguel asked. "I have to admit, your wedding was probably the most fun family party we've ever had. Your husband seems like a really good guy." "Marcus is wonderful," Rachel said, warming to the familiar topic. "We're still figuring out the day-to-day stuff, but everything feels right, like we're building something good together." "That's awesome. I remember thinking at the wedding that you guys just looked like you belonged together. Very natural, very happy." Rachel smiled, remembering the joy and celebration of that evening. "What about you? How's school going? Are you seeing anyone?" "School's great, actually. I'm working on some really interesting projects, and I think I found my specialty within computer science. As for dating, well, that's actually gotten more complicated lately." Rachel felt a flutter of interest, wondering if Miguel's romantic situation might explain some of the changes Carmen had noticed. Complicated how? He hesitated, seeming to consider how much information to share. "I've been seeing someone for a few months, but it's not exactly straightforward." "What do you mean?" "She's older than me, like significantly older, and she has a successful career, makes good money, lives in a completely different world than college students usually inhabit. Rachel began to understand where Miguel's expensive gifts might have originated. How much older? 8 years. She's 28, has her own marketing consulting business, owns a condo downtown. I know how that sounds, but it's not what you're thinking. She's not supporting me or buying me things to keep me around. But she has bought you things. Miguel shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Some things, yeah, but not like that. She invited me to events where I needed to dress appropriately, so she helped me put together a wardrobe that would fit in with her friends and colleagues. And she's given me gifts for special occasions, but nothing excessive or manipulative. Rachel found herself in the awkward position of trying to determine whether Miguel was being honest about his relationship or rationalizing a problematic situation. From his perspective, he was dating an accomplished woman who cared enough about his comfort and success to help him navigate unfamiliar social territory. From Carmen's perspective, he was probably being manipulated or taken advantage of by someone with questionable motives. "How did you meet her?" Rachel asked, trying to keep her tone neutral and curious rather than suspicious. "Through my job at the bookstore, actually. She came in looking for books about sustainable business practices for a client presentation, and we ended up talking for like an hour about environmental policy and corporate responsibility. She was smart, funny, really passionate about her work. When she asked me if I wanted to get coffee sometime, I said yes. And that was several months ago? 4 months.
I know it's not a typical college relationship, but Rachel, she's amazing. She challenges me intellectually, encourages my academic goals, introduces me to ideas and experiences I never would have encountered otherwise. I'm learning so much from being with her." Rachel studied Miguel's expression as he talked about his girlfriend, noting the genuine enthusiasm and affection in his voice. He didn't sound like someone being manipulated or exploited. He sounded like someone who had found a meaningful connection with a person who happened to be at a different life stage. "What's her name?" Rachel asked. "Sarah. Sarah Chen." Miguel paused, then added with a slight smile, "No relation to Marcus, as far as we know, but the coincidence is kind of funny." "Have you introduced her to the family?" Miguel's expression grew more cautious. "Not yet. I'm not sure how everyone would react to the age difference, and I don't want to deal with a bunch of opinions and advice about my relationship choices." Rachel felt a pang of sympathy, remembering her own reluctance to introduce Marcus to the extended Martinez family because of their tendency to offer unsolicited relationship guidance. "Are you planning to introduce her eventually?" "Maybe, if things continue to go well and I think the family is ready to meet her without making it weird." Miguel paused, studying Rachel's face. "Actually, can I ask you something? Is there a particular reason you wanted to get together today? Because this feels a little like an interview." Rachel felt heat rise in her cheeks, realizing that her questioning had become more pointed than she intended. Miguel was perceptive enough to recognize when he was being investigated, and she owed him honesty about her motivations. "Carmen asked me to talk to you," Rachel admitted. "She's been worried about some changes she's noticed in your behavior and appearance, and she wanted me to find out if you were dealing with any problems." Miguel's expression shifted through several emotions: surprise, understanding, and finally, resignation. She noticed the clothes and accessories. Among other things, she's concerned that you might be involved in something dangerous or illegal, something that would explain how you can afford expensive gifts on a bookstore salary. Miguel laughed, though the sound held more irony than amusement. Of course, she jumped to the worst possible conclusions. That's very typical Carmen behavior. She cares about you, Miguel. Sometimes her caring comes out in ways that feel intrusive, but her concerns usually come from a place of genuine love. "I know that," Miguel said, his expression softening. "I appreciate that she pays attention and worries about all of us. But I'm 20 years old, Rachel. I'm old enough to make my own relationship choices without family approval or supervision." "Absolutely. But maybe you could help ease her concerns by being more open about what's actually happening in your life. The secrecy is probably making her imagination run wild." Miguel considered this suggestion while stirring his coffee thoughtfully. "You're probably right. I've been trying to avoid family drama, but
avoiding explanation is probably creating more drama than just being honest would. So you're not involved in anything illegal or dangerous. God, no. I'm dating a successful businesswoman who occasionally buys me nice things and takes me to events where I need to dress appropriately. The most dangerous thing I've done recently is try sushi that was probably too expensive for my budget. Rachel felt relief wash over her, both because Miguel wasn't in trouble and because she would be able to give Carmen information that would hopefully put her concerns to rest. Would you be willing to talk to Carmen directly about Sarah? Maybe even introduce them? I guess I could do that. Though, knowing Carmen, she'll probably want to investigate Sarah's background, credit score, and intentions toward the family. Probably, Rachel agreed with a laugh. But she'll also be relieved to know that you're not involved in anything that could hurt you or get you in trouble. They finished their coffee while talking about lighter topics: Miguel's computer science projects, Rachel's adjustment to married life, and family gossip about various relatives' romantic and professional developments. By the time they parted ways, Rachel felt confident that Carmen's concerns had been largely unfounded and that Miguel was simply navigating the normal challenges of dating someone outside his usual social circle. That evening, she called Carmen to report on her conversation with Miguel, carefully presenting the information in a way that emphasized Miguel's honesty and maturity rather than Carmen's tendency toward dramatic conclusions. So, he's dating an older woman who has money, Carmen summarized after Rachel finished her explanation. He's dating a successful professional who cares about him and wants him to feel comfortable in her social environment, Rachel corrected gently. Same thing. Not necessarily. Miguel seems happy, Carmen. He's not being manipulated or exploited. He's just learning to navigate a relationship with someone who has different resources and life experiences. Carmen was quiet for several long moments, processing this information. I suppose that's better than drugs or gambling. Much better. And Miguel said he's willing to talk to you directly about Sarah, maybe even introduce them. That would be good. Though, knowing Carmen, she'll probably want to investigate Sarah's background, credit score, and intentions toward the family. Probably, Rachel agreed with a laugh. But she'll also be relieved to know that you're not involved in anything that could hurt you or get you in trouble.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
Carmen, Rachel said carefully, promise me you won't subject Sarah to the same kind of elaborate testing you put Marcus through. Miguel deserves to introduce his girlfriend to the family without worrying that she's going to be evaluated and judged. I wasn't planning to test anyone, Carmen replied, though her tone lacked conviction. I just want to make sure this Sarah person has Miguel's best interests at heart. The best way to determine that is to get to know her through normal family interactions, not through manipulation or secret investigations. Fine, Carmen agreed, though Rachel suspected her aunt was already formulating plans for evaluating Sarah's suitability as Miguel's girlfriend. 2 weeks later, Rachel found herself once again recruited into Carmen's family management activities, this time as a supporting player in the carefully orchestrated introduction between Sarah Chen and the Martinez family. Carmen had insisted that the meeting take place at a neutral location rather than someone's home, allegedly to reduce pressure on everyone involved, but probably to ensure that she could control the environment and dynamics of the encounter. The chosen venue was Café Luna, an upscale restaurant in downtown Chicago that specialized in fusion cuisine and attracted a clientele of young professionals and couples celebrating special occasions. Carmen had made reservations for 6 people: herself, Miguel, Sarah, Rachel, Marcus, and Isabella, who had been invited both as Miguel's mother and as moral support for Carmen's evaluation process. Rachel arrived 15 minutes early, partly out of habit and partly because she wanted to observe the initial interactions between Sarah and Carmen without the distraction of managing her own social obligations. Marcus accompanied her, having volunteered to serve as a neutral buffer in case the conversation became tense or awkward. Carmen was already seated at their reserved table, wearing a navy dress and pearls that struck the perfect balance between elegant and approachable. She had clearly put considerable thought into her appearance, choosing an outfit that would convey both respectability and openness to new relationships. "Any predictions about how this will go?" Marcus asked quietly as they joined Carmen at the table. Carmen will be polite, but thorough in her questioning. Sarah will either be charmed by Carmen's interest or annoyed by her interference. Miguel will be nervous about everyone getting along. Isabella arrived next, looking slightly frazzled from navigating downtown traffic, but pleased to see Rachel and Marcus. As Miguel's mother, Isabella had been dealing with Carmen's concerns about her son's relationship for weeks, and she seemed relieved to finally have the opportunity for direct observation rather than speculation. "Has anyone met this Sarah before tonight?" Isabella asked, settling into her chair with the careful movements of someone trying to project calm confidence. "Just Miguel, as far as I know, though Carmen has probably conducted extensive research." "I haven't researched anyone. I simply want to meet the woman who's been such an important part of Miguel's life." Before anyone could respond to this assertion, Miguel appeared at their table with a woman who immediately commanded attention through sheer presence rather than dramatic appearance. Sarah Ken was indeed older than Miguel, probably in her late 20s, as he had indicated, with shoulder-length black hair and an understated elegance that spoke of professional success and personal confidence. She wore a simple black dress with interesting jewelry and carried herself with the easy grace of someone comfortable in upscale social settings. "Everyone, I'd like you to meet Sarah," Miguel said, his voice carrying a mixture of pride and nervousness. "Sarah, this is my family. My mother Isabella, my Aunt Carmen, and my cousins Rachel and Marcus." Sarah moved around the table offering handshakes and warm greetings to each family member, her manner friendly but composed. Rachel found herself impressed by Sarah's poise in what was obviously a high-stakes social situation from Miguel's perspective. "It's so wonderful to finally meet you all," Sarah said, taking her seat beside Miguel. "Miguel talks about his family constantly, so I feel like I know you already. All good things, I hope," Carmen said with a smile that Rachel recognized as her information-gathering expression. "Absolutely. He's especially fond of your cooking, Carmen. I think I've heard detailed descriptions of every dish you've ever made for family gatherings." Carmen looked pleased by this information, as Rachel had known she would. One of the fastest ways to Carmen's approval was through appreciation of her culinary skills and family traditions. The conversation flowed smoothly through the initial stages of dinner, with Sarah asking thoughtful questions about family members' work and interests, while sharing appropriate details about her own background and career. She had grown up in San Francisco, studied business at UC Berkeley, and moved to Chicago 5 years earlier to start her consulting firm. Her parents were both retired teachers who lived in a small town north of San Francisco and spent their time traveling and volunteering with literacy programs. Rachel watched Carmen's reactions carefully, noting her aunt's expressions of approval as Sarah demonstrated knowledge of Chicago restaurants, cultural events, and neighborhood characteristics that suggested genuine integration into the city's social fabric rather than temporary residency. She clearly wasn't using Miguel as a convenient companion while waiting to return to her real life elsewhere. "Miguel mentioned that you met at his bookstore," Isabella said, during a pause in the conversation about Sarah's business clients. "What kind of books were you looking for?" "Research materials for a presentation about sustainable business practices. I was working with a client who wanted to implement environmentally responsible policies, and I needed to understand the latest thinking about corporate environmental responsibility." "And Miguel was helpful with that research?" Carmen asked, her tone suggesting genuine curiosity rather than skeptical questioning. "Incredibly helpful. He not only found the books I needed, but recommended additional resources I wouldn't have discovered on my own. We ended up having a fascinating conversation about environmental policy, corporate ethics, and social responsibility. I was impressed by his knowledge and his thoughtful perspective on complex issues." Miguel smiled at this description, clearly pleased by Sarah's appreciation of their initial intellectual connection. Rachel found herself warming to Sarah, recognizing in her the kind of person who valued intelligence and curiosity over more superficial qualities.
Miguel is very bright, Isabella said with obvious maternal pride. He's always been interested in how things work, how systems function, how to make things better. That's one of the things I admire most about him, Sarah said, reaching over to squeeze Miguel's hand briefly. He approaches problems with genuine curiosity and creativity. He's taught me to think about issues from perspectives I wouldn't have considered on my own. Carmen leaned forward slightly, her expression suggesting she was about to ask a more pointed question. Sarah, can I ask what your intentions are regarding Miguel? I realize that might seem an intrusive question, but we care about him very much. Rachel tensed, recognizing the familiar pattern of Carmen's direct approach to family protection. Sarah, however, seemed neither surprised nor offended by the question. I appreciate your concern for Miguel, and I understand why you'd want to know, Sarah replied thoughtfully. Honestly, I care about him more than I expected to when we first started dating.
He challenges me intellectually, makes me laugh, and brings a perspective to my life that I didn't realize I was missing. I'm not looking for a casual relationship, and I'm not trying to take advantage of his youth or inexperience. What about the age difference? Carmen continued. Do you worry that you're at different life stages, that you might want different things? Of course I've thought about that, Sarah said. But Miguel is mature for his age, and I don't think 8 years is an insurmountable gap, especially given how well we connect on intellectual and emotional levels. If anything, our different experiences and perspectives make our relationship more interesting. And the gifts Miguel mentioned, the clothes and accessories. Sarah's expression grew slightly defensive, though she maintained her composure. I've invited Miguel to events where he needed to dress appropriately for professional settings. I wanted him to feel comfortable and confident, so I helped him build a wardrobe that would serve him well in those situations. I've also given him gifts for his birthday and other special occasions, but nothing excessive or manipulative. Rachel watched Carmen process this information, noting her aunt's expressions of consideration and evaluation. Carmen was clearly trying to determine whether Sarah's explanations were honest and reasonable or carefully constructed justifications for problematic behavior. Those gifts have caused some family concern, Carmen said carefully. When a college student suddenly appears with expensive items he can't afford on his own, relatives worry about where those things came from. I understand that completely, Sarah replied. If I had a nephew or cousin in Miguel's situation, I would probably have similar concerns. But I can assure you that my relationship with Miguel is based on genuine affection and respect, not financial manipulation or control. The conversation continued through dessert and coffee, with Sarah demonstrating consistent thoughtfulness and maturity in her responses to both subtle and direct questions about her relationship with Miguel. She showed interest in family traditions, asked appropriate questions about various relatives, and made it clear that she respected Miguel's close family relationships and had no intention of interfering with those connections. By the time they left the restaurant, Rachel sensed that Carmen's initial skepticism had evolved into cautious approval. Sarah had handled the family evaluation process with grace and intelligence, addressing concerns directly while maintaining her dignity and demonstrating genuine care for Miguel's well-being. Well, Isabella asked as they walked to their cars, what's the verdict? She seems lovely, Carmen said, though her tone suggested she was still processing her observations. Intelligent, successful, genuinely fond of Miguel. But, Rachel prompted, recognizing that Carmen's approval was not yet complete. But I want to see how they interact over time, in different situations. Tonight was obviously a performance for everyone involved. I'd like to observe their normal dynamic without the pressure of family evaluation. Miguel heard this comment and turned to address Carmen directly. What would help you feel more comfortable about Sarah and me? Carmen considered the question seriously. Time, mostly. The chance to see you two together in casual situations, to watch how you handle normal relationship challenges, to understand how your different life experiences affect your compatibility. Would you like to invite us to Sunday dinner sometime? I'd love to experience Miguel's famous family gatherings. Carmen's face lit up with genuine pleasure. That's a wonderful idea. Next Sunday, if you're both available. As they parted ways in the parking lot, Rachel felt cautiously optimistic about the evening's outcome. Sarah had clearly made a positive impression on the family, and Miguel seemed relieved and happy about the successful introduction. Even Carmen appeared satisfied with her initial evaluation, though Rachel knew her aunt would continue observing the relationship carefully over the coming weeks and months. "Well," Marcus asked as they drove home through the quiet city streets, "what's your assessment?" "I think Sarah is exactly who she appears to be. A successful, intelligent woman who genuinely cares about Miguel and treats him with respect and affection. I don't see any evidence of manipulation or exploitation." "And Carmen?" "Carmen will reserve final judgment until she's observed them together in multiple settings. But I think she's cautiously approving. Sarah handled the family evaluation process very well." "Better than I did, probably," Marcus said with a laugh. "You didn't have to handle an evaluation process. Carmen tested you by creating months of external pressure to see how you'd react. Sarah got the direct approach. Which method do you think is more effective?" Rachel considered this question as they pulled into their apartment building's parking lot. "Probably the direct approach. It's more honest and less emotionally exhausting for everyone involved. Though I suspect Carmen still has some observational tests planned for Sarah and Miguel." Over the following months, Sarah became a regular presence at Martinez family gatherings, gradually integrating into the complex social dynamics with apparent ease and genuine enjoyment. She remembered everyone's names and interests, contributed thoughtfully to conversations, and demonstrated consistent affection and respect for Miguel without being possessive or controlling. Carmen's approval of Sarah grew steadily as she observed the couple's interactions in various settings: casual Sunday dinners, holiday celebrations, and family outings to museums and cultural events. Sarah treated Miguel as an equal partner despite their age and experience differences, supporting his academic goals while encouraging him to maintain his close family relationships. By the time summer arrived, Sarah had become such an established part of the family that her absence from any gathering would have been notable and concerning. She brought homemade desserts to potluck dinners, remembered family members' birthdays, and offered professional advice to relatives starting new businesses or changing careers. Dating someone with different life experiences had challenged him to grow intellectually and socially while maintaining his essential personality and values. "I have to admit, I was wrong about Sarah," Carmen told Rachel during a quiet moment at a 4th of July barbecue where Sarah was helping Miguel's younger cousins with a complicated card game. "She's been nothing but positive for Miguel, and she treats our family with genuine respect and affection." "Are you surprised?" Carmen considered the question while watching Sarah patiently explain the rules of the game to an 8-year-old who kept forgetting which cards were wild. "Yes and no. I'm surprised by how well she's handled the family dynamics, but I'm not surprised that Miguel chose someone with such good character. He's always been a good judge of people." "Even at 20? "Especially at 20. Young people often see clearly because they haven't learned to rationalize away their instincts the way adults do." Rachel smiled at this observation, recognizing the wisdom in Carmen's words. Her own relationship with Marcus had been based on instinctive recognition of compatibility and character, feelings that had proven accurate despite her inexperience with lasting relationships. As the summer progressed into fall, Rachel noticed that Carmen's attention had shifted away from Miguel and Sarah's relationship toward new concerns about other family members. This pattern was familiar. Carmen would identify a potential problem, investigate thoroughly, and either resolve her concerns or mobilize family resources to address legitimate issues. Once satisfied that a situation was stable and healthy, she would redirect her protective instincts toward the next family member who seemed to need guidance or support. The realization that Carmen had fully accepted Sarah came during Thanksgiving dinner when Rachel observed her aunt consulting with Sarah about menu planning for Christmas celebrations. Carmen only sought input on family traditions from people she considered permanent family members, and her casual inclusion of Sarah in holiday planning decisions represented complete acceptance of Miguel's relationship choice. "Looks like Sarah passed all of Carmen's tests," Marcus observed quietly, noting the same interaction. "With flying colors," Rachel agreed. "I think Carmen has officially adopted her as a niece-in-law." "Even though they're not married?" "Carmen doesn't wait for legal formalities when she decides someone belongs in the family. She's been calling you her nephew-in-law since about 2 weeks after our wedding. Marcus laughed, remembering Carmen's tendency to claim family relationships based on emotional rather than legal connections. Should I be flattered or concerned? Definitely flattered. Carmen's family membership is selective and permanent. Once you're in for life, with all the benefits and obligations that entails. What kind of obligations? Well, you'll be expected to attend every major family gathering, contribute to group gifts for weddings and graduations, and submit to periodic evaluations of your character and commitment. But you'll also have an entire extended family invested in your happiness and success. Sounds like a fair trade, Marcus said, watching Carmen direct Sarah and Miguel in the arrangement of dessert plates with the authority of someone orchestrating a military operation. As winter settled over Chicago and the holidays approached, Rachel reflected on the year's developments with satisfaction and amusement. Carmen's concerns about Miguel had been resolved through direct communication and careful observation, rather than elaborate manipulation, suggesting that her aunt might be evolving toward more straightforward methods of family protection. The success of Sarah's integration into the Martinez family had also demonstrated that Carmen's protective instincts, while sometimes intrusive, were generally motivated by genuine love and concern for their relatives' well-being. Her evaluation of Sarah had been thorough but fair, and her acceptance had been complete once she determined that the relationship was healthy and mutual. Most importantly, Rachel had managed to navigate her role as Carmen's investigative assistant without compromising her relationships with either her aunt or her cousin. She had been honest with Miguel about her motivations while respecting his privacy and autonomy, and she had provided Carmen with information that eased her concerns without betraying Miguel's confidence. As she watched her family gather around the dinner table for their traditional Thanksgiving celebration, Rachel felt grateful for the complex web of relationships that connected them all. Carmen's protective interference could be exhausting and sometimes problematic, but it also created a safety net of support and concern that had sustained the family through various challenges and transitions. Sarah sat between Miguel and Isabella, participating easily in the overlapping conversations that characterized Martinez family gatherings while helping serve dishes and refill wine glasses. She had clearly found her place within the group dynamics, contributing to the collective energy while maintaining her individual personality and perspectives. "Next year, we should have Christmas at my house," Sarah suggested during a lull in the conversation about holiday scheduling. "I have a big enough space, and I'd love to host everyone." The casual way she included herself in future family planning made Rachel smile, recognizing the confidence that came with secure acceptance. Sarah no longer questioned whether she belonged, she simply participated as a full family member with ideas and preferences about group activities. Carmen nodded approvingly at Sarah's suggestion. "That's very generous, mija. We could do Christmas Eve dinner at your place and Christmas Day brunch at my house." The endearment mija represented the final seal of approval in Carmen's vocabulary, reserved for family members she considered daughters or nieces regardless of legal relationships. Rachel caught Miguel's eye across the table and saw his smile of satisfaction at hearing his girlfriend addressed with such clear acceptance and affection. As the evening progressed and relatives gradually departed for their own homes, Rachel helped with cleanup duties while reflecting on how dramatically the family dynamics had shifted over the past year. Carmen's concerns about Miguel had been resolved, Sarah had been successfully integrated, and everyone seemed more relaxed about the relationship's future prospects. "Thank you for helping with Miguel earlier this year," Carmen said as they packed leftover food into containers. "Your conversation with him made all the difference in resolving the situation." "I'm glad it worked out well for everyone. Miguel and Sarah seem very happy together." "They do, and I feel much better about their relationship now that I've had the chance to observe their dynamic over time. Sarah is good for Miguel, and he's good for her too." Rachel nodded, remembering her initial skepticism about Carmen's concerns and her reluctance to get involved in what had seemed like unnecessary family interference. In retrospect, Carmen's instincts were partially correct. Miguel's relationship had indeed been worth investigating, not because it was problematic, but because it was significant and deserved family recognition and support. As she and Marcus drove home through the quiet city streets, Rachel found herself thinking about the ways that family relationships require ongoing negotiation and adjustment. Carmen's protective instincts would probably never disappear entirely, but they seemed to be evolving toward more respectful and direct approaches to family concerns. "Do you think Carmen has learned anything from the Miguel situation?" Marcus asked as if reading her thoughts.
I think she's learned that direct communication works better than manipulation and secret testing. Sarah handled the family evaluation process much better than we handled months of hidden pressure. So maybe future family relationships will face less interference? Rachel laughed, remembering Carmen's comment about reserving judgment until she had observed Miguel and Sarah in multiple settings. I think future family relationships will face different interference.
Carmen will always be protective and concerned, but maybe she'll be more honest about her methods.
That's probably the best we can hope for.
Actually, I think that's exactly what we should hope for. Carmen's concerns usually come from a place of love, even when her methods are questionable. I'd rather have family members who care too much than family members who don't care enough. Marcus squeezed her hand as they turned into their apartment complex. Even when caring too much involves elaborate schemes and investigations? Even then. Because ultimately, Carmen's interference helped us prove that our relationship was strong enough to withstand external pressure, and it helped Miguel introduce Sarah to the family in a way that ensured her complete acceptance. The methods might be unconventional, but the results have been positive. As they settled into their evening routine, Rachel realized that she had gradually shifted from viewing Carmen's family involvement as problematic interference to recognizing it as an expression of deep love and commitment to her relatives' well-being. Her aunt's methods might be dramatic and sometimes manipulative, but her intentions were consistently protective and supportive. The realization that Carmen would probably continue to involve herself in family relationships felt less concerning now than it had when Rachel was dealing with her own romantic situation. Understanding Carmen's motivations made her actions more predictable and manageable, even when they remained intrusive and complicated. Most importantly, Rachel had learned to navigate her own role in Carmen's family management system without compromising her relationships with other relatives or betraying confidences. She could serve as Carmen's investigative assistant when necessary, while maintaining honesty and respect in her interactions with family members who found themselves under observation. As she drifted off to sleep that night, Rachel felt grateful for the complex web of family relationships that surrounded her, even when those relationships required careful navigation and occasional diplomatic intervention. Carmen's love might come with complications, but it also provided a foundation of support and concern that had sustained their family through various challenges and transitions. The knowledge that her aunt would continue to monitor family relationships with protective intensity no longer felt threatening or overwhelming. Instead, it felt reassuring to know that someone cared enough about their collective well-being to notice problems early and mobilize resources to address them, even when those resources included elaborate investigations and careful evaluations of romantic partners. Rachel smiled as she remembered Sarah's graceful handling of Carmen's direct questioning at their first family dinner. Future family members would face their own versions of Carmen's evaluation process, but they would also receive the full support and acceptance of the Martinez family once they proved their commitment and character to Carmen's satisfaction. It was, Rachel reflected, a fair exchange. Temporary scrutiny in return for permanent belonging. Careful evaluation followed by complete acceptance. Carmen's methods might be unconventional, but they had created a family culture where relationships were taken seriously and love was protected fiercely, even when that protection came with complications and interference. The pattern would undoubtedly continue with future relationships, engagements, and marriages, but Rachel now understood how to participate in Carmen's family management system while maintaining her own integrity and relationships with other relatives. She could serve as a bridge between Carmen's protective instincts and the family members who needed support or guidance, helping to facilitate communication and understanding while avoiding the drama and manipulation that had characterized her own romantic situation. As winter deepened and the new year approached, Rachel looked forward to watching how Carmen's family involvement would evolve and adapt to new challenges in relationships. Her aunt's protective instincts would remain constant, but her methods might continue to become more direct and honest as she learned from experience and feedback. The prospect of ongoing family drama no longer felt exhausting or overwhelming. Instead, it felt like part of the rich complexity of belonging to a large, loving, intensely connected family where everyone's well-being mattered and no one's problems went unnoticed or unaddressed. Carmen's interference might be inconvenient, but it was also a manifestation of the deep bonds that held their family together through all kinds of challenges and changes. 2 years had passed since Sarah's successful integration into the Martinez family, and Rachel had begun to believe that Carmen's protective instincts might finally be settling into a more manageable pattern of concern rather than active interference. This optimistic assumption shattered on a crisp October morning when Carmen called with what she described as an emergency requiring immediate family intervention. "Rachel, we have a serious situation developing with your cousin Amber," Carmen announced without preamble, her voice carrying that familiar tone of urgent authority that Rachel had learned to approach with extreme caution. "I need you to come over immediately so we can discuss how to handle this properly." Rachel glanced across their sun-drenched kitchen at Marcus, who was preparing his elaborate weekend breakfast ritual of homemade waffles with seasonal fruit compote. They had been looking forward to a relaxing Saturday morning, their first free weekend in over a month due to work commitments and social obligations. The prospect of diving into another family crisis felt particularly unwelcome, given their recent stress levels. "What kind of situation?" Rachel asked, though experience had taught her that Carmen's emergencies ranged from genuine crises requiring immediate intervention to elaborate concerns based on misinterpreted information and worst-case scenario thinking. "I can't discuss it over the phone. This requires an in-person conversation with complete privacy. Can you be here within an hour?" Rachel looked longingly at Marcus's waffle preparations, then at the peaceful morning light streaming through their apartment windows. The day had held such promise for comfortable domesticity and uninterrupted togetherness, but Carmen's tone suggested that resistance would only delay the inevitable rather than prevent it entirely. "All right, I'll be there in an hour. Should I bring Marcus?" "Not this time. This situation requires delicate handling, and the fewer people involved initially, the better. We can discuss whether to involve Marcus later, depending on how complicated things become." After ending the call, Rachel found Marcus watching her with sympathetic understanding and mild amusement. He had become remarkably adept at reading the signs of Carmen's family interventions and had developed philosophical acceptance of their periodic disruption of weekend plans. "Another family emergency?" he asked, not bothering to hide his smile at the familiar pattern. "Apparently something serious involving Amber. Carmen wants a private consultation before deciding how to proceed." Marcus nodded thoughtfully while arranging fresh strawberries on a plate with artistic precision. "Do you want me to keep these waffles warm for when you get back, or should I assume you'll be gone for several hours?" Rachel considered this question while gathering her keys and jacket. Carmen's family consultations had a tendency to expand beyond their initial scope as new information emerged and additional relatives became involved in problem-solving discussions. What began as brief strategy sessions often evolved into elaborate investigations requiring multiple meetings and coordinated family responses. "Better assume several hours," Rachel said, kissing Marcus goodbye with genuine regret. "If this follows the usual pattern, I'll probably end up running reconnaissance missions and facilitating difficult conversations by the day is over." The drive to Carmen's house in Riverside provided Rachel with time to speculate about what crisis might have befallen Amber, who at 27 had always seemed like one of the most stable and well-adjusted members of their extended family. Amber worked as a nurse at Northwestern Memorial Hospital, lived in a charming apartment near Wicker Park, and maintained an active social life balanced with family commitments and professional responsibilities. She had been in a committed relationship with her boyfriend David for over 3 years, though they had never formally announced engagement plans or moved in together. Rachel's mental review of recent family interactions failed to yield any obvious warning signs of problems in Amber's life. At the last family gathering, Amber had seemed her usual cheerful, competent self, discussing her work with typical enthusiasm and sharing funny stories about her colleagues' romantic adventures. If anything, she had appeared more relaxed and confident than usual, suggesting that her personal and professional situations were stable and satisfying. Carmen's house appeared unchanged from Rachel's previous visits, with its meticulously maintained garden and welcoming front porch decorated with seasonal flowers and comfortable furniture. Rachel found her aunt waiting in the sunroom, surrounded by photo albums and what appeared to be printed emails or documents that she quickly gathered and stacked when Rachel arrived.
Thank you for coming so quickly, she said, embracing Rachel with unusual intensity, before gesturing toward the seating area where she had obviously prepared for a lengthy discussion.
I've been thinking about this situation all night, and I believe we're facing something that could have serious consequences for Amber's future happiness. Rachel settled into her chair with growing curiosity and concern. Carmen's dramatic language could be misleading, but her instincts about family problems had proven accurate often enough that Rachel took her warning seriously, even when she disagreed with her methods of addressing those problems. What exactly has you so worried about Amber? Carmen took a deep breath, organizing her thoughts with the precision of someone who had rehearsed this explanation multiple times. 3 weeks ago, Amber called to tell me she was taking a vacation to Europe with David. She was excited about the trip, said they had been planning it for months and finally saved enough money to make it happen. Rachel nodded, remembering Amber mentioning the trip during a phone conversation several weeks earlier. She had sounded thrilled about visiting Paris, Rome, and Barcelona with David, describing it as their first major international adventure together and a celebration of their relationship's stability and their individual professional achievements. That sounds wonderful, Rachel said carefully, uncertain where Carmen's concerns might be leading. Did something happen during the trip? That's just it. I don't think they ever went to Europe. Carmen leaned forward, her expression grave with certainty. I've been paying attention to Amber's social media posts, and something doesn't add up about her travel stories. Rachel felt a familiar sinking sensation as she recognized the pattern of Carmen's investigative methods. Her aunt had clearly been conducting surveillance of Amber's online activities, analyzing posts and photos for inconsistencies that might reveal deception or problems. What kind of inconsistencies? Carmen reached for a tablet and began scrolling through screenshots she had apparently collected as evidence. Look at these photos she posted from supposedly Paris. The lighting is wrong for October in France, the architectural details don't match the locations she claims to have visited, and most importantly, I reverse searched these images online. You reverse searched her photos? Several of them are stock images from travel websites, posted with captions claiming they were taken by Amber and David during their romantic European adventure. Rachel, your cousin has been posting fake vacation photos and lying to the family about where she's been for the past 3 weeks. Rachel stared at the tablet screen, studying the images Carmen had flagged as suspicious. Even to her untrained eye, some of the photos looked oddly generic, lacking the personal touches and spontaneous elements that typically characterize genuine travel photography. The absence of Amber and David from most of the scenic shots was also unusual, given their tendency to document their relationship milestones with couple photos. Maybe she's being privacy conscious about posting pictures of herself and David, Rachel suggested, though she could hear the uncertainty in her own voice. Some people prefer to share scenic shots rather than personal photos on social media. Rachel, look at this, Carmen said, pulling up a comparison between one of Amber's photos and an identical image she had found on a tourism website. The matches were unmistakable, down to specific lighting conditions and compositional elements that would be impossible to replicate coincidentally. Where do you think she actually was for 3 weeks if she wasn't in Europe? Carmen's expression grew more troubled. That's what we need to find out. But Rachel, I'm afraid something serious is happening. People don't fabricate elaborate vacation stories unless they're hiding something significant. What if Amber is in some kind of trouble? What if she needed to disappear for a while and couldn't tell the family the real reason? Rachel found herself torn between skepticism about Carmen's dramatic conclusions and genuine concern about the evidence her aunt had collected. The fake vacation photos were definitely suspicious, but the explanations for such deception ranged from harmless embarrassment to serious crisis requiring family intervention. Have you tried calling Amber directly to ask about the discrepancies? I don't want to alert her that I've been investigating until we have a better understanding of what's happening. If she's in trouble, approaching her too directly might cause her to become more secretive or refuse family help. If she's lying for less serious reasons, confronting her might damage our relationship unnecessarily.
Rachel recognized the familiar dilemma of Carmen's protective strategies. The desire to help family members often required methods that felt intrusive and potentially harmful to the relationships they were designed to preserve. The balance between concern and respect for privacy remained a constant challenge in Carmen's approach to family management. What do you want me to do? I want you to spend time with Amber this week. See if you can get her to open up about what's really been going on. Maybe invite her to lunch or coffee, let her talk about her trip, and see if you notice any inconsistencies or signs that she's hiding something important. Rachel felt reluctance wash over her as she recognized the familiar role of family investigator that Carmen periodically assigned to her. These missions invariably placed her in the uncomfortable position of deceiving relatives while gathering information for Carmen's analysis and intervention planning. Carmen, I don't feel right about investigating Amber's personal life based on suspicious social media posts. Maybe there are innocent explanations for the photo discrepancies that don't require family intervention. Like what? Rachel considered this question while studying the evidence Carmen had assembled. Maybe she and David broke up during the trip and she didn't want to explain the situation to the family yet. Maybe they had money problems and couldn't afford the vacation they had planned, so she's embarrassed about having to change their plans. Maybe David got sick and they had to cut the trip short and she's using stock photos to fill out her vacation documentation. Carmen nodded thoughtfully, acknowledging the possibility of these alternative explanations. Those scenarios would still indicate that Amber is dealing with problems she feels unable to share with her family. Whether the underlying issue is relationship trouble, financial stress, or health problems, she clearly needs support that she's not asking for directly. But she also has the right to privacy about her personal problems. Amber is 27 years old, Carmen. She's entitled to handle her relationship and financial issues without family supervision or intervention. Of course she is, but she's also entitled to family support when she needs it. And sometimes people need help recognizing when they need help. Remember how isolated you felt when David was treating you badly? How much you benefited from having family support even when you initially resisted it? Rachel felt the familiar tug of Carmen's logic, recognizing the kernel of truth in her concern for Amber's well-being. Her own experience with David had indeed involved significant isolation and denial about the relationship's problems, and she had ultimately been grateful for family intervention that helped her recognize patterns of manipulation and deception. However, Rachel's situation with David had involved clear signs of emotional abuse and deception that warranted family concern, whereas Amber's suspicious vacation photos might indicate nothing more than embarrassment about changed plans or privacy preferences about social media documentation. "I'll reach out to Amber," Rachel said finally, "but I'm not going to interrogate her or spy on her personal life. If she wants to talk about problems she's having, I'll listen and offer support. If she prefers to keep her private matters private, I'll respect that choice."
Carmen's expression showed mild disappointment but acceptance of Rachel's conditions. "That's fair. Just spend time with her and see if she seems like she needs help with anything. Sometimes that's all it takes to open the door for someone to ask for support." Over the following week, Rachel made several attempts to connect with Amber for casual social activities, only to discover that her cousin seemed unusually busy and unavailable for spontaneous meetings. Amber's responses to invitations were polite but evasive, citing work commitments, prior obligations, and general exhaustion that made social plans feel overwhelming. The pattern of avoidance was subtle but persistent enough to raise Rachel's own concerns about Amber's well-being. Even during their busiest periods, Amber typically made time for family connections and seemed to genuinely enjoy opportunities for one-on-one conversations with cousins and relatives. Her current unavailability felt uncharacteristic when she realized that her cousin had not attended the past 2 Sunday family dinners, occasions that Amber rarely missed unless she was working or genuinely ill. When Rachel asked other family members about Amber's absence, she received vague explanations about busy work schedules and social commitments that didn't align with Amber's usual patterns of family participation. The breakthrough in understanding Amber's situation came through an unexpected encounter at a downtown coffee shop where Rachel was meeting a college friend for lunch. As she waited for her friend to arrive, Rachel noticed Amber sitting alone at a corner table, staring intently at her laptop screen with an expression of deep concentration mixed with anxiety. Amber looked different from her usual polished, confident appearance. Her normally immaculate hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail. She wore faded jeans and an oversized sweater that suggested comfort rather than style, and her face showed the kind of stress lines that develop from weeks of insufficient sleep and persistent worry. Rachel approached Amber's table with genuine concern rather than investigative curiosity, her family loyalty overriding any awkwardness about their recent communication patterns. "Amber, hey, are you okay? You look exhausted." Amber looked up with startled surprise, quickly closing her laptop and attempting to compose her expression into something resembling normalcy. "Rachel, hi. I'm fine, just catching up on some work stuff during my lunch break. Can I sit down for a minute? I've been trying to get together with you for weeks, and I miss talking to you." Amber hesitated, glancing around the coffee shop as if checking for other family members who might appear and complicate her situation. Finally, she gestured to the empty chair across from her with apparent resignation. "Sure, but I can only stay a few more minutes. I have to get back to the hospital." Rachel settled into her seat and studied Amber's face with growing concern. Up close, the stress lines were even more apparent, and Amber's usual bright energy seemed muted by exhaustion and preoccupation. Whatever was happening in her cousin's life was clearly taking a significant toll on her physical and emotional well-being. "Amber, I know something's wrong. You've been avoiding family events, declining invitations to get together, and you just look really stressed. Can I help with whatever's going on?" Amber's composure cracked slightly, her eyes filling with tears that she quickly blinked away while glancing around to ensure their conversation remained private. "It's complicated, Rachel. I'm handling it, but it's just been a really difficult few weeks. Does this have anything to do with your European vacation? Because if you and David broke up or had problems during the trip, you don't have to pretend everything is perfect. The family would understand and support you through relationship difficulties." Amber's expression shifted through several emotions: surprise, confusion, and finally a kind of bitter amusement. "My European vacation, right. Did Carmen send you to ask about that?" Rachel felt heat rise in her cheeks as she realized that her approach had been more transparent than intended. "Carmen noticed some inconsistencies in your travel photos and became concerned that you might be dealing with problems you didn't feel comfortable sharing with the family." "Inconsistencies," Amber repeated with a hollow laugh. "She investigated my social media posts, didn't she? Probably reverse-searched the images and discovered they were stock photos from travel websites. Amber, what's really been going on? Where were you for those 3 weeks if you weren't in Europe?" Amber was quiet for several long moments, apparently debating how much information to share. Finally, she sighed deeply and opened her laptop again, turning the screen toward Rachel to reveal what appeared to be medical research databases and patient information systems. "I was in Houston, at MD Anderson Cancer Center, getting treatment for stage 2 breast cancer that I was diagnosed with 6 months ago." The words hit Rachel like a physical blow, her mind struggling to process the magnitude of what Amber had just revealed. Cancer. Her vibrant, healthy cousin had been battling cancer for 6 months without telling any of them, undergoing treatment alone while maintaining the pretense that everything in her life was normal and stable. "Amber," Rachel breathed, reaching across the table to grasp her cousin's hands, "why didn't you tell us? Why didn't you tell the family?" "Because I knew exactly what would happen. Carmen would take over, organizing meal trains and hospital visits and family meetings about my treatment options. Mom would become hysterical and want to quit her job to take care of me. Everyone would start treating me like a cancer patient instead of like myself, and I would lose any sense of normalcy or privacy about my own medical situation." Rachel understood immediately the dilemma Amber had faced in deciding whether to share her diagnosis with their large, intensely involved family. The Martinez clan's response to serious illness typically involved mobilizing massive support systems that, while intentional, could feel overwhelming and invasive to the person receiving care. But Amber, going through cancer treatment alone, that's so much to handle by yourself. "I'm not completely alone. David knows, and he's been incredibly supportive. My medical team in Houston is excellent, and I've connected with other patients who understand what I'm experiencing. I have support.
It's just more controlled and private than what I would get from our family.
Is the treatment working? What's your prognosis? Amber's expression brightened slightly. Really good, actually. The tumor was caught relatively early, and it responded well to chemotherapy. I just finished my last round of treatment 2 weeks ago, and my scans show no evidence of remaining cancer. I'll need regular monitoring for the next few years, but my doctors are optimistic about my long-term outlook. Relief flooded through Rachel, followed immediately by a complex mixture of emotions. Gratitude that Amber's treatment had been successful, sadness that her cousin had faced this crisis without family support, and anger that Amber had felt unable to trust them with such significant news. So, the European vacation story was cover for your treatment schedule? The European vacation story was cover for my recovery time. I needed 3 weeks off work to recuperate from my final treatment cycle, and I didn't want to explain to everyone why I looked tired and felt sick. It seemed easier to let people think I was having a wonderful romantic adventure rather than dealing with the reality of cancer recovery. Rachel studied with stock photos on Amber's laptop, understanding now why her cousin had chosen generic travel images rather than attempting to fabricate a more elaborate deception. The fake vacation had been a desperate attempt to maintain privacy and normalcy during an extraordinarily difficult period. Amber, I understand why you made the choices you did, but hiding something this significant from the family has created other problems. Carmen is convinced you're in some kind of serious trouble, and she's planning to escalate her investigation until she figures out what's happening. What kind of escalation? Knowing Carmen, probably surveillance, background checks on David, interviews with your coworkers, and eventually direct confrontation about whatever secrets she thinks you're keeping. Amber groaned, pressing her palms against her temples. This is exactly why I didn't want to involve the family. I was trying to handle my medical situation with dignity and privacy, and now I'm going to end up being the subject of one of Carmen's elaborate intervention campaigns. Rachel felt torn between loyalty to Carmen's protective instincts and recognition that Amber deserved to control her own medical information and family communications. The fake vacation photos had indeed created legitimate concerns about Amber's well-being, but the underlying situation was far more complex than Carmen's assumptions had suggested. What if we found a middle ground? Rachel suggested. What if you shared some information with Carmen to ease her concerns without having to expose all the details of your medical situation? What kind of middle ground? Tell her that you and David had to change your vacation plans for personal reasons, that you're dealing with some private health issues that are being successfully managed, and that you appreciate her concern but need family members to respect your privacy while you work through this situation. Amber considered this suggestion while closing her laptop and gathering her belongings. Do you think Carmen would accept that explanation without demanding more details? Honestly, probably not initially. But if you're firm about your boundaries and consistent about requesting privacy, she'll eventually respect your wishes. Carmen's protective instincts are strong, but she's not actually malicious or deliberately intrusive. What if I offered to give Carmen and a few other close family members a general update about my health situation without going into specific medical details? Something like acknowledging that I've been dealing with a health challenge that required treatment, but that I'm doing well now and prefer to keep the details private. I think that would help Carmen feel less excluded and worried while still maintaining your right to medical privacy. The secrecy is probably more concerning to her than whatever health problems you might be managing. Would you be willing to help me figure out how to approach this conversation with Carmen? I don't want to make the family situation worse, but I also can't handle having my medical privacy invaded by well-meaning relatives. Of course. Let's schedule a time to talk this through and plan an approach that protects your privacy while addressing Carmen's concerns. They arranged to meet the following evening at Rachel's apartment, where they could discuss strategy without the risk of family members overhearing their planning. As Rachel drove home from the coffee shop, she found herself wrestling with conflicting emotions about Amber's revelation and the complex family dynamics it had exposed. On one hand, she felt enormous relief that Amber's secretive behavior had been motivated by medical privacy rather than serious personal problems requiring intervention. Amber was not in danger, not being manipulated or exploited, and not struggling with issues that warranted family emergency response. On the other hand, Rachel felt sadness that Amber had felt unable to trust the family with such significant news, and frustration that their collective tendency toward overwhelming involvement had created an environment where someone facing cancer treatment chose isolation over support. Most complicated of all was Rachel's recognition that Carmen's concerns had partially been justified, even though her assumptions had been wrong. Amber had indeed been hiding something significant, had indeed been lying to the family about her activities and well-being, and was indeed managing challenges that could have benefited from family support. The gap between Carmen's protective instincts and Amber's privacy needs represented a broader tension within their family culture about the balance between support and autonomy, between caring involvement and respectful boundaries. Rachel realized that her role in resolving this situation would require helping both Carmen and Amber find ways to honor their respective needs without compromising their relationship. That evening, Rachel explained Amber's situation to Marcus while they prepared dinner together, seeking his perspective on the family dynamics and potential approaches to managing Carmen's concerns while respecting Amber's privacy. "It sounds like Amber was caught between two impossible choices," Marcus observed, while chopping vegetables for their stir-fry. "Either tell the family about their cancer diagnosis and lose control over their medical privacy, or keep the diagnosis secret and create the kind of mysterious behavior that would trigger Carmen's investigative instincts." Exactly. And now that Carmen knows something significant is being hidden, she's not going to let go of her concerns until she gets some kind of explanation that satisfies her protective instincts. Marcus added the vegetables to their heated pan, considering the situation while managing the cooking process. What if the real issue is that your family doesn't have good systems for handling situations where someone needs privacy about serious problems? Maybe this situation could be an opportunity to develop better approaches to supporting family members while respecting their boundaries. Rachel felt a spark of recognition at Marcus's suggestion. Her family's approach to crisis support had indeed evolved around the assumption that more involvement was always better, that problems shared with the group were more likely to be solved successfully than problems handled individually. But Amber's situation demonstrated that some challenges required different kinds of support that prioritized autonomy and privacy over collective problem solving. So instead of just resolving this specific conflict between Carmen and Amber, we could use this as an opportunity to establish better family protocols for handling privacy requests and boundary setting. Maybe. It seems like the underlying issue is that Carmen interprets secrecy as a sign of serious problems requiring intervention, while Amber views secrecy as a reasonable approach to maintaining control over personal information. If you could help them understand each other's perspectives, they might be able to develop new ways of communicating about sensitive situations. The following evening, Amber arrived at Rachel's apartment looking somewhat better rested, but still carrying the tension of someone preparing for a difficult conversation. She had clearly spent considerable time thinking about how to approach the family situation, arriving with notes and specific talking points she wanted to cover with Carmen. "I've decided I want to be more honest with the family about my health situation. Not because I think I was wrong to want privacy, but because I realize the secrecy has created its own problems that are affecting my relationships with people I love."
Rachel felt encouraged by Amber's thoughtful approach to the situation. "What level of information do you feel comfortable sharing?" "I want to acknowledge that I was diagnosed with breast cancer 6 months ago, that I've been receiving treatment in Houston, and that my prognosis is excellent. I want to explain why I chose privacy initially, and I want to ask for the family's support in respecting my boundaries going forward." "How do you want to handle Carmen's concerns about the fake vacation photos?" Amber smiled ruefully. "I want to apologize for lying and explain that I was trying to protect my privacy during recovery rather than hide anything dangerous or problematic. I also want to acknowledge that my approach created legitimate concerns and that I understand why Carmen felt compelled to investigate." Rachel admired Amber's willingness to take responsibility for the confusion her secrecy had created while still maintaining her right to medical privacy. The approach balanced accountability with boundary setting in a way that addressed Carmen's protective instincts without completely capitulating to family pressure for full disclosure. "Do you want me to arrange a meeting with Carmen, or would you prefer to call her directly?" I think I'd like you to be there when I talk to her, if you're willing. You understand both of our perspectives, and you might be able to help navigate the conversation if it becomes emotional or difficult. They arranged to meet with Carmen the following Sunday afternoon, giving Amber time to prepare mentally for the conversation while allowing Carmen's concerns to build to a point where she would be receptive to new information about Amber's situation. Sunday arrived with unseasonably warm weather for late October, creating the kind of golden afternoon that made Chicago feel magical despite the approaching winter. Rachel and Amber drove to Carmen's house together, using the travel time to rehearse key points and discuss strategies for managing their aunt's likely emotional reactions to Amber's news. Carmen greeted them at the door with obvious pleasure at seeing them together, though Rachel detected underlying tension that suggested her aunt's concerns about Amber had continued to intensify over the past week. They settled in Carmen's sunroom, surrounded by the late-season flowers and comfortable furniture that made the space feel intimate and welcoming. "I'm so glad you both came," Carmen said, serving coffee and homemade cookies, with her usual attention to hospitality details. "Rachel, did you discover anything during your conversations with Amber that might help us understand what's been happening?" Amber spoke before Rachel could respond. "Carmen, Rachel didn't discover anything because I asked her here so I could talk to you directly about the situation I've been dealing with." Carmen's attention shifted immediately to Amber, her expression showing a mixture of relief and concern. "What situation, mija?" "6 months ago, I was diagnosed with breast cancer. I've been receiving treatment in Houston, and the fake European vacation photos were cover for my recovery time after my final chemotherapy cycle. My prognosis is excellent, and I'm doing well, but I wanted privacy about my medical situation while I was going through treatment." The words hung in the sunroom's warm air for several long moments while Carmen processed the magnitude of what Amber had revealed. Rachel watched her aunt's face shift through a series of emotions: shock, sadness, fear, relief, and finally hurt that she had been excluded from such significant news. "Cancer," Carmen repeated softly. "You've been dealing with cancer alone for 6 months?" "Not completely alone. David has been incredibly supportive, and I have an excellent medical team. But I chose not to tell the family because I needed to maintain some control over my treatment experience and recovery process." Carmen's eyes filled with tears as she reached for Amber's hands. "Mija, why didn't you trust us to support you through this? We love you. We would have done anything to help you get through treatment." "I know you love me, Carmen, but I also know how our family responds to medical crises, and I wasn't prepared to handle that level of involvement while also managing chemotherapy and trying to maintain some semblance of normal life." "What do you mean?" Amber looked at Rachel for support before continuing. "I mean meal trains and hospital visits and family meetings about my treatment options. I mean everyone treating me like a cancer patient instead of like myself. I mean losing any sense of privacy or personal control over my own medical situation." Carmen was quiet for several long moments, considering Amber's explanation with obvious pain at the implication that family support would have felt more burdensome than helpful. "I understand that our family can be overwhelming when someone is in crisis, but Amber, going through cancer treatment without emotional support from the people who love you most? That seems so isolating and frightening." It was isolating sometimes, but it was also empowering to make my own decisions about treatment and recovery without having to manage other people's emotions and opinions about my medical situation. Rachel watched the conversation unfold with recognition that both Carmen and Amber had valid perspectives about family support and medical privacy. Carmen's desire to provide care and assistance came from genuine love and protectiveness, while Amber's need for autonomy and control reflected legitimate concerns about maintaining dignity and decision-making authority during a vulnerable period. "Carmen, I respect your right to privacy about medical information, but I'm hurt that you felt unable to trust me with something so important to your well-being. Have I done things in the past that made you feel like I wouldn't respect your boundaries about healthcare decisions?" The question was asked with such genuine vulnerability that Rachel felt her own eyes fill with tears. Carmen's willingness to examine her own behavior and consider how her protective instincts might sometimes feel intrusive demonstrated remarkable self-awareness and love for Amber.
It's not about you specifically, Carmen. It's about the family culture around crisis management. When someone has serious problems, the entire extended family mobilizes to provide support, which is beautiful and loving, but also overwhelming when you're trying to maintain some sense of normalcy and personal agency. Carmen nodded slowly, understanding beginning to replace hurt in her expression. So, the fake vacation photos were your way of creating space to recover from treatment without having to manage family reactions and support efforts. Exactly. I needed those 3 weeks to rest and process my experience without having to reassure anyone else or coordinate with well-meaning family members who wanted to help. And I interpreted your secrecy as a sign that you were in trouble and needed intervention, Carmen said, completing the circle of miscommunication that had created the current situation. Rachel felt relief at Carmen's growing understanding of Amber's perspective. Her ability to recognize the legitimacy of Amber's privacy needs while processing her own feelings of exclusion suggested that they might be able to resolve this conflict without permanent damage to their relationship. Carmen, I want you to know that I'm grateful for your concern and your willingness to investigate when you thought I might be in danger. I understand that the fake photos created legitimate reasons to worry about my well-being. Thank you for saying that. But I also want you to know that I'm sorry you felt like you couldn't trust the family to support you in the way you needed to be supported.
That's something we need to address as a group. Amber looked surprised by Carmen's apology and her acknowledgement that the family's approach to crisis support might need adjustment. What do you mean? I mean that if our family culture around medical emergencies feels so overwhelming that someone facing cancer chooses isolation over inclusion, then we need to develop better ways of offering support that respect people's autonomy and privacy preferences. Rachel felt a surge of pride in her aunt's thoughtful response to Amber's situation. Carmen's willingness to consider changing established family patterns in order to better serve individual needs demonstrated remarkable flexibility and genuine love for her relatives. That would be wonderful, Amber said, her voice thick with emotion. I love this family, Carmen. I want to be able to share important things with you without feeling like I'm losing control over my own life. What would that look like? Carmen asked. How could we have supported you through cancer treatment in a way that felt helpful rather than overwhelming? Amber considered the question carefully, clearly appreciating Carmen's genuine interest in learning how to provide better support in future situations. Maybe by asking what kind of help I wanted instead of assuming what kind of help I needed. Maybe by respecting my decisions about who to include in medical discussions and when. Maybe by trusting that I could ask for specific support when I needed it, rather than mobilizing comprehensive care without consulting me first. Carmen nodded thoughtfully. Those all sound like reasonable approaches. I think I've been so focused on making sure family members receive maximum support during difficult times that I haven't considered how that level of involvement might sometimes feel intrusive or overwhelming. It's not that the support isn't appreciated, Amber clarified. It's that the support sometimes comes in forms that don't match what the person actually needs or wants. Rachel recognized an opportunity to expand the conversation beyond Amber's specific situation toward broader family dynamics. Maybe this is something we could discuss with the whole family, developing better protocols for offering support during medical crises or personal emergencies. What kind of protocols? Carmen asked. Guidelines for asking what kind of help someone wants before providing it. Agreements about respecting privacy requests and medical information boundaries. Systems for coordinating support efforts so they don't become overwhelming or invasive. Amber looked intrigued by this suggestion. That would be amazing. If the family had clear expectations about how to handle sensitive situations, it would be easier for people to share important news without worrying about losing control over their own circumstances. Carmen was quiet for several minutes, apparently considering the implications of developing more structured approaches to family support during crises. Finally, she looked directly at Amber with an expression of deep love and regret. Mija, I'm sorry that our family's way of showing love made you feel like you had to face cancer alone. That was never our intention, and I want to do better in the future. Amber began crying then,
finally releasing months of accumulated stress and isolation while accepting the family connection she had needed but felt unable to request safely. Carmen moved to embrace her niece, holding her while she processed the complex emotions of sharing her medical experience with someone who cared deeply about her well-being. Rachel felt her own tears falling as she watched the two women she loved find their way back to connection despite the misunderstandings and hurt that had separated them. The reconciliation represented more than just resolution of Amber's specific situation. It demonstrated the family's capacity for growth and adaptation in service of better relationships. "What happens now?" Rachel asked when Amber and Carmen had composed themselves enough to continue the conversation. "Now I get to start being honest with the family about my health situation without feeling like I'm inviting overwhelming interference," Amber said with a smile that looked genuinely hopeful for the first time in months. "And I get to learn new ways of showing love and concern that respect people's boundaries and preferences," Carmen added, "though I'll probably need help and reminders as I'm adjusting to different approaches." "What about telling the rest of the family about Amber's diagnosis? How do you want to handle sharing that information?" Amber and Carmen looked at each other with the understanding of people who had found their way through a difficult conversation to renewed trust and mutual respect. "I think I'd like to tell the family myself at the next Sunday dinner. I want to share the news in my own words and ask for their support and respecting my privacy about medical details, while still being included in family activities and relationships." "That sounds perfect," Carmen agreed. "And I want to use that same dinner to talk about developing better family guidelines for supporting each other during difficult times without being overwhelming or intrusive." Over the following weeks, Amber's disclosure of her cancer diagnosis and successful treatment created exactly the kind of family response Rachel had expected, an outpouring of love, support, and emotion that initially felt overwhelming despite everyone's good intentions. However, Carmen's commitment to modeling new approaches to family support helped the group navigate their collective concern in ways that honored Amber's preferences and boundaries. Sunday dinners became forums for discussing not just Amber's health situation, but broader questions about family support systems and individual privacy rights. The conversations were sometimes awkward and occasionally tense as relatives adjusted to new expectations about asking before helping and respecting boundaries around personal information. But gradually, the family developed more sophisticated approaches to crisis support that balanced their natural desire to provide comprehensive care with recognition that effective support sometimes required restraint and individual customization. Amber's situation became a catalyst for positive changes in family dynamics that benefited everyone involved. Carmen's role in these evolving family patterns was particularly interesting to observe. Her protective instincts remained as strong as ever, but she channeled them into creating systems that enabled better support, rather than conducting surveillance and intervention campaigns. She became the family's advocate for privacy rights and boundary respect, using her authority and influence to establish new cultural expectations about how to show love during difficult times. The transformation wasn't immediate or seamless. There were instances where family members defaulted to old patterns of overwhelming involvement, requiring gentle correction and redirection toward more respectful approaches. But the overall shift toward honoring individual preferences while maintaining family connection represented significant growth in their collective emotional intelligence. Rachel found herself serving as a bridge between different family perspectives during this adjustment period, helping relatives understand why new approaches were necessary while supporting individuals who needed help advocating for their own needs and boundaries. The role felt natural and fulfilling, drawing on her experiences navigating Carmen's protective instincts while maintaining her own autonomy in relationships. By spring, Amber's health situation had stabilized into a new normal of regular medical monitoring and continued recovery, with family support that felt genuinely helpful rather than overwhelming. She had returned to full-time work at the hospital, resumed her active social life, and begun planning a real vacation with David to celebrate the conclusion of her treatment and their relationship's strength through a challenging period. More significantly, Amber's relationship with Carmen had evolved into something deeper and more trusting than their previous connection. The crisis had forced both women to examine their assumptions about family support and individual autonomy, ultimately strengthening their bond through increased understanding and mutual respect. Carmen's approach to family management had also evolved in ways that surprised and pleased the extended family.
Her protective instincts remained as strong as ever, but she channeled them into creating supportive environments rather than conducting surveillance and intervention campaigns. She became the family's advocate for privacy rights and boundary respect, using her authority and influence to establish new cultural expectations about how to show love during difficult times.
She became known for asking excellent questions about what kind of help people wanted, rather than assuming what kind of help they needed. The changes were perhaps most visible during the family's response to various subsequent challenges and transitions, marriages, job changes, health concerns, and relationship problems that emerged over the following months. In each situation, family members demonstrated increased skill at offering support that matched the individual's preferences and needs, rather than defaulting to overwhelming involvement. Rachel reflected on these changes during a quiet evening at home with Marcus, as they sat on their apartment balcony watching the city lights twinkle in the gathering dusk. The past year had brought significant growth in her family's emotional sophistication and her own understanding of the balance between love and autonomy. "It's interesting how Amber's situation ended up changing the entire family culture," Marcus observed, following her thoughts with the intuitive understanding that had characterized their relationship from the beginning. "Carmen always says that families are like ecosystems. When one part changes, everything else has to adapt to maintain balance. Amber's need for privacy forced everyone to reconsider their assumptions about how to show love during difficult times. Do you think the changes will last, or will people gradually drift back to old patterns?" Rachel considered this question while watching a plane cross the darkening sky above Chicago. "I think the changes will last because they're making everyone's relationships better, not just solving one specific problem. When people discover that respecting boundaries actually strengthens connections rather than weakening them, they tend to keep doing it." And Carmen seems genuinely committed to the new approaches. Carmen loves being right about family dynamics, and she's discovered that asking what people need is more effective than assuming what they need. Her protective instincts are satisfied by creating supportive environments rather than managing individual situations. Marcus laughed, remembering Carmen's dramatic interventions during their own relationship development. It's hard to imagine Carmen taking a hands-off approach to family concerns. She's not hands-off exactly, she's just more strategic about when and how to get involved. She's learned to distinguish between situations that require intervention and situations that require respectful support from a distance. As summer approached and the family prepared for various celebrations and gatherings, Rachel felt grateful for the growth and healing that had emerged from what had initially seemed like another classic Carmen family crisis. Amber's cancer diagnosis and her choice to handle treatment privately had created an opportunity for the entire family to develop better approaches to love and support. The experience had also strengthened Rachel's own role as a mediator and bridge builder within the family dynamics. Her ability to understand different perspectives and help relatives communicate more effectively had proven valuable not just in crisis situations, but in ongoing relationship maintenance and conflict resolution. Most importantly, the situation had demonstrated the family's capacity for growth and adaptation in service to better relationships. Carmen's willingness to examine her own protective methods and develop new approaches showed remarkable self-awareness and commitment to her relatives' well-being. Amber's courage in sharing her medical situation, despite her privacy concerns, showed trust in the family's ability to change and respect her boundaries. The combination of love, respect, and flexibility had created a stronger foundation for family relationships that could honor both individual autonomy and collective caring. Rachel felt confident that they would continue to navigate future challenges with increased wisdom and emotional sophistication. As autumn returned and the anniversary of Carmen's initial concerns about Amber approached, Rachel hosted a small celebration dinner for the relatives who had been most involved in working through the family dynamics around medical privacy and support systems. Amber, Carmen, Marcus, Miguel, Sarah, and Isabella gathered around Rachel's dining table to share a meal and reflect on the changes they had experienced over the past year. "I want to thank everyone for being willing to grow and change during a really difficult period," Amber said as they raised their glasses in a toast. "I never expected that my cancer diagnosis would end up improving our family relationships, but that's exactly what happened. Sometimes the biggest challenges create the best opportunities for positive change.
Carmen replied, smiling at Amber with the deep affection of someone who had learned important lessons about how to love more effectively. Here's to families that keep getting better at being families, Rachel added, and they all drank to that sentiment with genuine appreciation for the complex, beautiful, sometimes difficult bonds that connected them all. As the evening progressed and conversation flowed around topics both serious and lighthearted, Rachel felt deep satisfaction with the role she had played in helping her family navigate toward healthier dynamics. Carmen's protective instincts would undoubtedly create future challenges and opportunities for growth, but the family now had better tools for handling those situations with wisdom and respect for individual needs. The pattern would continue, Rachel knew, because that was the nature of families and love and the ongoing work of maintaining relationships across different personalities, life stages, and circumstances. But they were better equipped now to handle whatever came next, having learned that the strongest love often required the most thoughtful restraint. Late that night, as Rachel and Marcus cleaned up from the dinner party, she reflected on how much their own relationship had benefited from the family's increased emotional sophistication. The pressure and testing they had endured during their early dating period now seemed like valuable preparation for the ongoing challenges of building a life together within the context of extended family dynamics. "Do you think we'll face Carmen's intervention efforts again in the future?" Marcus asked as they loaded the dishwasher with the remnants of their celebration. "Probably, but I think there'll be different kinds of interventions, more thoughtful, more respectful, but still definitely present because Carmen will always be Carmen." "And you're okay with that?" Rachel smiled, remembering the long journey from Carmen's elaborate testing of Marcus's commitment to tonight's celebration of family growth and healing. "I'm more than okay with it. Carmen's love might be complicated, but it's also one of the most reliable things in my life. I'd rather have family members who care too much than family members who don't care enough. Even when caring too much involves investigating social media posts and orchestrating elaborate evaluations of romantic partners? Even then, because ultimately, Carmen's interference comes from love. And love that persistent and protective is actually kind of amazing, even when it's also exhausting and sometimes inappropriate." As they finished cleaning and prepared for bed, Rachel felt grateful for the complex web of relationships that surrounded and supported her life. Carmen's dramatic interventions might continue to disrupt their peaceful weekends and create unexpected challenges, but they also provided a foundation of care and connection that made everything else feel more secure and meaningful. The family dynamics would continue to evolve as new situations and relationships required navigation and adjustment. There would be more weddings, more health concerns, more career changes, and more opportunities for growth and conflict resolution. Carmen would undoubtedly continue to need event problems and mobilize responses, though hopefully with increased respect for individual boundaries and preferences. But the fundamental pattern of love, protection, and mutual support would remain constant, binding them together through all kinds of challenges and celebrations. Rachel fell asleep that night feeling deeply grateful for belonging to a family complicated enough to require ongoing attention and loving enough to make that attention feel like a gift rather than a burden. The next morning brought a text from Carmen, thanking Rachel for hosting such a meaningful dinner and suggesting that they make it an annual tradition to celebrate the anniversary of important family growth and healing. Rachel smiled as she read the message, recognizing both Carmen's sentimental appreciation for milestone moments and her instinct to institutionalize positive family experiences. She texted back her agreement to make the celebration an annual tradition, already anticipating next year's gathering and wondering what new family dynamics and relationship developments they would be celebrating by then. Carmen's protective instincts would undoubtedly create new stories and new opportunities for growth, but they would face those challenges with increased wisdom and stronger foundations of trust and respect for individual needs. The afternoon sun streamed through their apartment windows as Rachel and Marcus settled into their weekend routine, peaceful and content with the knowledge that whatever family adventures lay ahead, they would face them together with humor, patience, and appreciation for the beautiful complexity of love that shows up wearing many different faces and expressing itself through many different methods. In the distance, Rachel's phone buzzed with what she suspected might be another family-related call from Carmen, and she smiled as she reached to answer it, ready for whatever new chapter in their ongoing family story was about to begin. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.